Okay, so that was quite a hike, and we've made it back here to Fort Danshui, or Shicholing Pautai. I want to explain further about my theory about Fort Bertin possibly being a Dutch observation post. Let's have a look at this map again by Garneau. So you can see we've moved back from Fort Bertin. We're now back here at Fort Danshui. Now what's very interesting also, and a very interesting detail about this map, and also the French mentioned this in their journals, is that there's a couple of towers. But what's even more interesting is that the French said that there is an additional tower. So there's two towers, but there's a third tower here at this position called Blockhouse West. And Blockhouse West was a French, kind of like a pillbox, or a small little tiny fort that they made on the west side of Fort Danshui to protect themselves on the west side. And the French said that they built this blockhouse on top of another tower. So that would be actually tower number 1 would be where they built it. Then there's another tower 2 and a tower 3. So they actually reported a total of 3 towers on this ridgeline. And they said that they think that these towers were from the Dutch period. Okay, so when the Dutch were here 300 years ago. So I thought, okay, that's very interesting. So there is evidence that the Dutch had interest in this ridgeline, and then my question is, why would they build those 3 towers? My thought is that they would build these 3 towers as watchtowers, and that Fort Bertin might have been another smaller watchtower that's overlooking the river. So I think for that we need to kind of go back into the Dutch history and talk about the history more as to why they would do that, or if that's possible. And I was thinking maybe the first thing we do is to go to Blockhouse West, and we can try and locate that position, and then we can talk about it more there. So a lot of people think that this may be Blockhouse West here, this location where there's this kind of a monument or a tomb. This is a logical location because it's actually at the top of the hill, and it's kind of in a central location. So I have to admit, when I first came here, I thought, yeah, this seems like a reasonable place for it. But when you actually check the maps like we did earlier, use the compass and study the maps carefully and read the history, I'm not so sure that this is where Blockhouse West is. So first of all, if you have a look at this bigger French map from Garneau, you can see it's actually right next to the road to Danshui, right? And the road to Danshui actually curves around the blockhouse. So then you have to find where the original road was, and it has to curve around the edge of it. So that's the first thing that makes me think that this may not be. Although some people might think that this is the road to Danshui here, there is actually a divot here. So that's kind of the difficult spot. But if we go to the wider map that I showed earlier of Garneau, of the whole area, and this map is fairly accurate. If you actually take a reading from here, you'll find that it doesn't exactly match up with Fort Burr. But the thing that changed my mind about this being the location is that actually the French photographer who came here and took different photos, he actually took some photos that show this location. So this is the first photograph that I looked at that is very interesting, and it kind of shows the hill line back in 1884-85. So there's La Dent, Nidaig, and then Fort Danshui shows that yes, Fort Danshui is in fact at the location we were at just now. And then as you go along, you can see that that's actually Blockhouse West. It looks like a blockhouse. It actually even looks like a bit of a tower. And you can see that the land actually drops off. And when you compare that to the French maps, the land also drops off. So it's kind of like the fort is not in a central location. The fort is actually at the end. So I think that actually Blockhouse West is just a little bit further. And let's head over to where I think it was. Whoa, I have to be careful here. It's all overgrown, but actually I think this is where the Blockhouse West was. And you can see, if you look carefully, underneath here, there's actually a round circular area that's been dug in. So I would definitely say that this looks like it used to be a gun position of some kind. My guess is that it used to be a Japanese artillery position. I believe they probably did that. Can't be sure, but I'm just imagining that this would be a very good gun position. And then of course, they would build the gun position on top of another gun position. So this is actually a very good position to have a complete view of the west, right? And the land actually drops off. So I think that this is probably where Blockhouse West was. If I check my compass from here and I match it with Fort Burr, it matches up totally. So, and another thing is I believe that the original road to Danshui curved around the front of it and came out the back. So actually there's a ridge line just behind this fort that goes down to the river, and then according to the French map, the road to Danshui went down that ridge line. So I think the evidence kind of points more towards the blockhouse being here, and I think there is kind of evidence that something was dug in at this position originally. So let's go backwards and say, okay, let's say that this is where the Dutch tower number 1 is. So there's tower number 2, number 3, go in this direction, and then the compass readings basically match up with that. So it seems clear that there was a series of towers along this ridge line, and the question is, you know, why would the Dutch build the towers here? So my idea is that they were very, very concerned with what is going on in the south, the south of Geelong, because coming from the Geelong River up to this direction, this is basically the back door to Geelong, and the Dutch actually had a settlement here. They had a fort at the far end of the bay, and so they would be very interested to know what's going on here. So it's clear that there was at least 3 towers on this hill that were probably of Dutch origin, and maybe more. So Fort Danshui may have had a tower, may have been a Dutch fort as well, it's possible. And also Need I could have also had a tower structure on it as well. We don't know, but definitely we had 3 here. And then there was also an additional tower that the French marked on their map, and I've also got photos here of the tower. You can see the tower's clearly square. It looks like the tower's on the top of the hill. And then in addition to that, we know that the Dutch had a fort at the very far end of the bay called Fort Noord-Holland, and at the top of the hill there was yet another tower. So it seems reasonable to me that these towers were a series of watchtowers that went right along the bay, so that the Dutch could see what's happening in other parts of the area, even when it's like nighttime, or even when it's raining and there's lots of stormy weather, which there is here. They would have a very, very quick way to figure out what's going on if anybody's attacking. There is some evidence here, and fortunately we do have a Dutch map that I have found online. It's available to everybody, and this map is not accurate in terms of compass, so you can't use a compass or anything to figure this out. You have to use really careful terrain association to see what they're talking about. But very clearly they indicate their settlement in the Geelong area, and this is the most interesting part. They note some features on the map that you can identify as the features nowadays. So for example, they mark number 2 on the map, and unfortunately the map is destroyed, so you can't see what it actually says, but you can see they've marked 2 as approximately the area of Badu or Chudu. That's where the 2 is marked. And most importantly, the number 1 area is marked where Fort Bertin is, or in that area, right where the Geelong River has an elbow. And so this map was from 1652 around. I read that's when it was dated. And so even at that time, they had a lot of interest in that area. Otherwise, they wouldn't have marked it on their map, right? And so we can also see that next to that there's an area where there's waterfalls, and we know from the French maps and photographs that there used to be a series of waterfalls just over the ridge here. And there still is a waterfall there. If you go there, you can still see the waterfall. So we can actually mark where these things were. Now, The only problem with this map is that there are no towers. So a lot of people would say, well, your evidence is bad because on this map we can only see there's one tower and we can see that there's the fort and there's nothing else. I believe we can answer this by going back into the Dutch history a little bit. And so the Dutch were here for just under 20 years, 19 years, until 1661. So there was a first period where they were here for almost 2 decades. And this map was made during that first period, okay? And during that first period, the Dutch were in charge of the whole area. And you can see there was a lot of Aboriginal villages in the plains in the south. Up to 300 were under Dutch kind of supervision, let's say. And a lot of these were Aboriginal tribes, native tribes, and they would move their villages around. And generally they were not seen as much of a military threat. So in my opinion, I think this map makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you wouldn't expect to see towers and fortifications on this hill. They would have no interest in that. They would see everything as peaceful. But the problem was in 1661, there was this fellow who's very famous called Koxinga, and he fought the Dutch in South Taiwan, in Tainan, and he kicked out the Dutch. This was a huge military battle, and the Dutch lost, and they had to leave Formosa at that point. So the Dutch were gone. However, they came back again. So this is something that a lot of people don't know, is that there's actually 2 periods of Dutch occupation. The second period was very different than the first one. The first one was very peaceful until the very end when there was this major conflict. And then the second period, the Dutch came back with the help of the Qing government of China. And then they came back into Geelong, into the north. And they reoccupied the Fort Noord. The second period, which was from 1664 until 1668, so it's a 4-year period, that period, the Dutch would have been much more on a war footing. They would have really cared about what's happening in the south, right? Because they're worried about Koxinga. In 1666, his son actually attacked the Fort Noord from the sea, and he was pushed back. So the Dutch and the Chinese who were helping them, they definitely were worried about Koxinga and his family attacking, or Aboriginals who were working for him coming this way. So I believe that would explain why the towers were placed here. I think they were probably placed during the second period. It would make sense that they would have a series of watchtowers going down. And I would say, when the French said that Fort Bertin, the very top of Fort Bertin, they said this was an ancient Chinese position, it makes me wonder, they also talked about ancient towers along the hill in the same area. So it makes me think that these may all fit together. I just think it's something that I would put out there, and maybe other experts can come in and they can investigate, disprove it, prove it, whatever. But I just thought it's an interesting possibility. And it also points to the fact that, not all of this area was French and Chinese. There was others that came before.
So we were been working for a documentary for many years.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you. You've been a big part of it. You've been this a legionnaire helping me through all of the jungle work, looking through all of the different histories and places throughout this. So yeah, today we talked about a very small part of it, but I've also explored most of the rest of the battlefield. As you know, you've come with me. And I decided to see if I can piece together the whole history and how to share that. So I felt that maybe if I can, I don't know, if I can or can't, but I thought this is a huge task, but to try to actually show the entire history, where these events happened during the conflict, piece it together, and then show it as a documentary series. As you know, I mean, it hasn't been easy to put this together. There's a lot of struggles when you're going in the jungle, but I think it's been very rewarding, and yes, I hope to release this documentary starting early next year. It might be shown in a little bit different way than we did it today, but definitely I will share the things that I have researched, discovered, you and I have discovered, have seen, and then hopefully people will be interested in this history.
与 Jerry 一起工作的那些年，时常得在低海拔丛林中忍受闷热的天气与蚊虫的骚扰，过程相当辛苦。这些辛苦也衬托了 Jerry 考究这段历史的投入，是值得敬佩的。听他分享的这些故事，忽然觉得很惭愧。身为台湾人，却不知道自己成长的这个岛屿埋藏着这样一段过往。反而一个跟这场战役毫无关联的加拿大人，比我们有更深入的了解。Fort Bertin 是众多遗址中最壮观，也保存最完整的。同时，它也连结了许多故事可以分享。除了 Fort Bertin， 台湾这块土地必然蕴藏着许多迷人或是辛酸的历史，值得我们去探索和记录。